Imagine a world lit only by firelight and fear, where every whisper could be a death sentence. This is medieval Europe, a time when honor was everything, and for a woman, her virtue was her life. Today, we're diving into a story that peels back the layers of this harsh reality, revealing a punishment for cheating wives so shocking. It horrified even the people who enforced it. This isn't just about laws and history. It's about a woman named Elsbeth, whose story, though fictional, represents the very real terror faced by countless others. Our story begins in a small, forgotten village nestled in the heart of the countryside. Life here is a constant cycle of hard work, prayer, and survival. The church bell marks the hours, and the Lord's castle looms on the hill, a constant reminder of who holds the power. In a community this small, secrets are a luxury no one can afford. Everyone knows everyone else's business, and the line between concern and condemnation is dangerously thin. And that's where we meet Elsbeth. She's a young woman, married not for love, but for a dowry of 2 cows and a small plot of land. Her husband, Gunnar, is a blacksmith, a man of calloused hands and a short temper, older than her by a decade. Their life is one of quiet desperation, filled with the clang of his hammer and the silence of their evenings. Elsbeth dreams of a world beyond the village borders, a world she's only glimpsed in the stories of traveling merchants. One such merchant, a charismatic man named Lorik, begins to visit the village more frequently. He brings silks from the east and spices that smell of distant lands. But for Elsbeth, he brings something far more intoxicating: attention. He sees her not just as a blacksmith's wife, but as a woman. Their conversations start innocently enough, hidden behind market stalls. A shared glance, a lingering touch as he hands her a bolt of fabric. Soon, these brief encounters turn into clandestine meetings in the woods, just beyond the watchful eyes of the village. But in a place like this, there are always watchful eyes. An elderly neighbor, Agnes, known for her sharp tongue and even sharper sight, notices. She sees Elsbeth slipping away at dusk. She sees the new ribbon in Elsbeth's hair, one too fine for a blacksmith's wife. The whispers start as a trickle, a hushed conversation between 2 women at the well. Did you see Elsbeth? Her husband is away, yet she smiles so. The trickle becomes a stream, flowing through the tavern, the market, the churchyard. The village, once a place of shared community, now hums with suspicion. Fear and a dark sort of excitement take hold. They are afraid for the sanctity of their homes, for the wrath of God, but there's also a grim anticipation. A public spectacle is brewing. The rumors finally reach Gunnar, the blacksmith. He hears them not from a friend, but as a drunken taunt in the tavern. A rival craftsman, emboldened by ale, sneers about the horns growing from Gunnar's head. Humiliation burns hotter than any forge. He confronts Elsbeth, his rage a terrifying storm. Her denials are weak, her fear a confession in itself. Gunnar, his honor shattered and his pride wounded, doesn't hesitate. He drags Elsbeth from their home, her cries echoing through the village streets. He doesn't take her to the priest or the village elder. He takes her straight to the lord of the manor. The accusation is made: adultery. For Elsbeth, her secret world has just collapsed, and the nightmare is only beginning. The medieval legal system was a confusing patchwork of local customs, church law, and the whims of the ruling lord. For a woman accused of adultery, there was no presumption of innocence. Her accuser, especially if it was her husband, was almost always believed. Elsbeth is thrown into a cold, damp cell in the castle dungeon, the heavy wooden door slamming shut on her world. There is no lawyer, no one to speak for her. Her only visitor is the priest, who urges her to confess, not for justice, but for the salvation of her soul. The Lord, more concerned with maintaining order and making an example of her than with finding the truth, quickly sets a date for her public trial and punishment. The traveling merchant, Lorik, is long gone, having vanished at the first sign of trouble, leaving Elsbeth to face her fate alone. The day of the punishment arrives. The entire village is forced to gather in the main square. This isn't just a sentence. It's a piece of theater designed to instill terror and reinforce control. The air is thick with a mixture of morbid curiosity and dread. Elsbeth is dragged from the dungeon. Her head has been shaved, a symbol of her shame. Her fine clothes replaced with a rough, plain shift. And then comes the punishment, a practice known in some parts of medieval Europe as the cuckold chase, or a variation of public shaming that was brutal and deeply psychological. The exact details varied by region, but the core was always the same: total and utter humiliation. In this version, two men, chosen for their strength, bring forth a large, agitated bull into the square. The crowd gasps. Gunnar, her husband, is forced to stand at one end of the square. Elsbeth is positioned at the other. The rule is explained by the Lord's steward. Elsbeth must run across the square to her husband. If she reaches him, he is supposed to take her back. But there's a catch. The angry bull is released into the square between them. This wasn't an execution in name, but it often was in practice. It was a spectacle of terror. The bull, confused and prodded, charges wildly. The crowd screams, a mix of horror and thrill. Elsbeth is no longer a person. She's part of a blood sport. She runs, slips, and scrambles in the mud, her every move dictated by the terrifying dance with the beast. Gunnar just stands there, his face a mask of stone. Does he want her to reach him? Or is this his ultimate revenge? This is the part of the story that would have shocked even the medieval onlookers. While public shaming was common, the use of a wild animal introduced a level of barbaric cruelty that blurred the line between justice and pure sadism. The community is forced to watch, not just a woman being shamed, but a human being tormented for their entertainment and moral instruction. They see their neighbor, the woman who once bought bread at the market, now fighting for her life against a beast. The children in the crowd are crying, shielding their eyes. Even the most hardened villagers look uneasy. The point has been made, but the cost is the community's own humanity. In our story, Elsbeth, through sheer adrenaline and luck, manages to dodge the bull's final charge and collapses at Gunnar's feet, bruised, bleeding, and utterly broken. According to the twisted rules, he is supposed to take her back. He pulls her up, and in front of the silent, horrified village, he leads her home. But this is no reconciliation. Her life from this moment on is one of living death. She is a ghost in her own home, a pariah in the village. No one will speak to her. Children run from her. She is a walking symbol of shame. Her punishment not a one-time event, but a lifelong sentence. The whispers that started her downfall now follow her everywhere. A constant, cruel reminder of the day the village square became an arena. Her story becomes a cautionary tale, told to young girls for generations to come, a brutal lesson in a world where a woman's desire could lead to a fate worse than death. The story of Elsbeth, while fictional, highlights the brutal reality of how female adultery was punished in parts of medieval Europe. The public and often violent nature of these punishments served as a powerful tool of social control, using fear and humiliation to enforce conformity. It's a dark chapter in history, reminding us how far we've come in our understanding of justice, humanity, and the rights of individuals. Thank you for watching. If you found this story compelling, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more dives into the hidden corners of history. See you next time. Word of the accusations spread through the village like a sudden frost, chilling the air and turning neighbor against neighbor. Elsbeth, who had walked these same cobbled streets with a light heart just yesterday, now felt the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on her back. The whispers followed her everywhere, sharp and cruel as thorns. Adultery, the word itself was a sentence, a brand that seared her reputation in an instant. She saw the judgment in the baker's frown, heard it in the blacksmith's silence, and felt it in the way mothers pulled their children closer as she passed. It wasn't just gossip. It was a public verdict being delivered before any trial. The village square, usually a place of lively chatter and commerce, transformed into an arena of public shame. The elders, their faces grim and set like stone, called a town meeting. The decree was posted on the church door, a stark black and white proclamation of her supposed sin for all to see. Elsbeth stood at the edge of the crowd, her body trembling, feeling utterly alone. She searched the faces for a flicker of sympathy, for someone who remembered the woman she was before this nightmare began, but found only cold curiosity and righteous anger. The law was clear, and medieval justice was swift and unforgiving. The punishment for a woman accused of her crime was severe, designed not just to punish the individual, but to serve as a terrifying example to all. Her husband, Heinrich, stood beside the elders, his posture rigid. This was the man who had once brought her wildflowers from the meadow, the man whose hands had always been gentle. Now, those same hands were clenched into tight fists at his sides. Elsbeth could see the conflict raging within him. The private man who loved her was at war with the public man who had to uphold his honor. The elders' voices were low but insistent, a constant pressure on him. They spoke of family name, of community standards, of the shame she had brought upon his household. Every word was a hammer blow, chipping away at the foundation of their life together. Heinrich wouldn't meet her eyes. His gaze was fixed on the ground, on the hard-packed earth of the square, as if the answers he sought were buried there. When he finally spoke, his voice was not his own. It was a hollow echo of the elders' demands, strained and unfamiliar. He asked for justice. The word hung in the air, a blade suspended over Elsbeth's head. The crowd murmured its approval. The line between their private life and this public spectacle had been irrevocably erased. Their home, once a sanctuary, was now just a stage for this tragedy. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. The scrutiny of the crowd was a burning heat on her skin. As the meeting was called to order, the town priest stepped forward, his expression solemn. He spoke of sin and redemption, of the sanctity of marriage, and the grave offense against God and the community. His words were meant to sound righteous, but to Elsbeth, they were just more fuel for the fire that was consuming her. Each pious phrase tightened the net around her. She was no longer Elsbeth, the weaver, the wife, the neighbor. She was the accused, a symbol of moral decay, a lesson to be learned. The weight of the accusation was crushing, and the fear of what was to come was a cold, hard knot in her stomach. The elders then began to lay out the process, a trial by ordeal. It was an ancient and brutal custom, a supposed test of God's will. They described the potential trials, trial by water, where she would be thrown into the river, and if she sank, she was innocent. If she floated, she was guilty and would be executed. Or trial by fire, where she would have to carry a hot iron bar, and if her hands healed cleanly, she was innocent. The descriptions were graphic, meant to instill terror, and they succeeded. The crowd gasped, a mixture of horror and morbid fascination on their faces. For them, it was a spectacle. For Elsbeth, it was a death sentence either way. She looked at Heinrich again, a silent plea in her eyes. Could he not see the madness in this? Could he not remember the love they shared? But his face was a mask of anguish and resignation. The pressure from the community had broken him. He had chosen his honor, his standing in the village, over her. The betrayal was a fresh wound, deeper and more painful than the public condemnation. In that moment, she understood the true horror of her situation. It wasn't just the law or the elders or the cruel whispers. It was the loss of the one person she thought would stand by her side. The tension in the square was thick enough to cut with a knife. The collective will of the village was a powerful, unstoppable force, and it was directed entirely at her. She felt like a small animal trapped in a hunter's snare, the circle of faces closing in. The distinction between private suffering and public punishment had completely vanished. Her shame was their entertainment. Her fear was their cautionary tale. As the elder formally declared that the trial would take place at dawn, a wave of dizziness washed over Elsbeth. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The faces in the crowd blurred into a single monstrous entity, hungry for justice, or perhaps just hungry for a spectacle. The private agony of her heart was now on full display, a sacrifice laid on the altar of public opinion. And as the crowd began to disperse, their voices still buzzing with the day's events, Elsbeth was left standing alone, caught in the unbearable glare of a world that had already condemned her. The coming dawn promised not a new day, but the beginning of her end. The air in the village hall is thick, heavy with the weight of judgment. Alara stands alone, her face a pale mask in the flickering torchlight. The elders, grim-faced and stoic, sit before her like stone statues, their eyes cold and unforgiving. The villagers, once her friends and neighbors, now pack the room, their murmurs a venomous tide of whispers and accusations. This isn't a trial. It's a spectacle, a foregone conclusion dressed in the robes of justice. The accuser, a man whose advances she had spurned, presents his evidence. A handful of letters, their ink smudged, their words twisted to paint a picture of illicit romance. He speaks of a hidden tryst in the whispering woods, a story woven from shadows and lies, but it's the story the village wants to hear. It's a sensational tale that feeds their hunger for drama, for a scapegoat to blame for the year's poor harvest and the creeping sense of unease that has settled over their homes. No one speaks for Alara. Her friends avert their gaze, their silence a betrayal sharper than any blade. Her family, heads bowed in shame, offer no defense. Fear is a powerful master, and in this small, isolated world, the fear of being cast out, of being associated with the accused, is stronger than any bond of kinship or loyalty. Alara searches the crowd for a single sympathetic face, a flicker of doubt, but finds only a sea of condemnation. Then the priest steps forward. His black robes seem to absorb the light, his presence casting a long, ominous shadow. He is the moral authority, the voice of God in this God-fearing community. He doesn't speak of evidence or doubt. He speaks of fire and damnation. His voice, a booming torrent of righteousness, fills every corner of the hall. He holds up a crucifix, its polished surface glinting. The sanctity of marriage is the bedrock of our community. He thunders, his finger jabbing towards Alara. It is a sacred covenant, blessed by the Almighty. To defile it is to invite ruin not just upon your own soul, but upon us all. The crowd murmurs in agreement, their fear stoked into a righteous blaze. He paints a terrifying picture of a wrathful God, of plagues and famine that will surely follow if this transgression goes unpunished. He speaks of the serpent in the garden, the temptation that leads to the fall. He calls Alara a vessel of sin, a corrupting influence that must be purged for the village to be pure again. His words are not a sermon. They are an incantation, a spell weaving guilt and terror into the hearts of his flock. He is not just condemning a woman. He is reinforcing his own power, reminding everyone that he is the gatekeeper of their salvation. Every word is a nail in Alara's coffin. The circumstantial evidence is irrelevant now. The priest has transformed this trial from a matter of fact into a battle for the very soul of the village. The elders, their faces set, nod in solemn agreement. They are not just judging a woman, they're performing a holy duty, a necessary sacrifice to appease an angry God and restore order. The verdict is delivered without deliberation. Guilty. The word hangs in the air, a final, crushing blow. Alara doesn't flinch. Her expression is one of hollow resignation. She has seen the ending of this story from the moment it began. The punishment is swift and cruel. She is to be cast out, exiled from the only home she has ever known, branded as an adulteress and left to fend for herself in the unforgiving wilderness. As the guard seize her arms, a collective sigh of relief ripples through the crowd. The scapegoat has been chosen. The tension breaks. They can return to their lives. Their conscience is clear, their fears momentarily assuaged. They have cleansed their community, cut out the perceived cancer. But as Ilara is dragged from the hall, her eyes meet those of her accuser one last time. There's no triumph in his gaze, only a flicker of something else, a hollow, fleeting fear. The heavy doors slam shut, plunging the hall back into its self-richest gloom. Outside, the cold night air is a shock to Ilara's skin. This is the end of her world, but it is also the beginning of something else. Stripped of everything, she has nothing left to lose. The village may have cast her out, but they have also set her free from their suffocating piety and their web of lies. The wilderness awaits, a future unknown and terrifying, but it is a future she will face on her own terms. The trial was not her end. It was her brutal, unforgiving birth into a new life. And as the sounds of the village fade behind her, a single, defiant thought takes root. They may have condemned her, but they have not broken her. Welcome back to our series exploring the often harsh realities of medieval life. Today, we delve into a dark and difficult subject: the punishment of women accused of cheating in medieval Europe. This wasn't a private matter. It was a public spectacle, a brutal ritual designed to enforce social order and patriarchal control. Imagine Elsbeth, our fictional character, standing accused. Her fate is no longer in her own hands. In many villages across Europe, the punishment for a wife's infidelity was severe and, most importantly, public. The goal was not just to punish the woman, but to make an example of her, a living warning to all other women in the community. The community itself often became the instrument of this punishment. Elsbeth, found guilty, would be sentenced to be ostracized, a social death sentence in a world where community was everything. She would be led to the village square, the heart of her community, now transformed into a stage for her shame. This is where the public humiliation would begin. One of the most common forms of punishment was the use of stocks or a pillory. Elsbeth would be locked into this wooden contraption, her head and hands trapped, leaving her completely vulnerable and exposed. She would be forced to endure the jeers, the insults, and the scorn of her neighbors, people she had known her entire life. They might throw rotten vegetables, mud, or even stones. The physical pain was secondary to the soul-crushing humiliation of being shamed by her own people. But the punishments could be even more brutal. In some regions, a ritual known as the cuckold's parade or charivari was practiced. The woman and her lover, if he was caught, might be forced to ride backwards on a donkey through the village, a symbol of foolishness and disorder. This procession was loud and chaotic, with villagers banging pots and pans, shouting obscenities, and creating a cacophony of shame that followed the condemned pair. This wasn't just punishment, it was a form of theater, a dark carnival designed to etch the lesson of fidelity into the collective memory of the village. Another common and terrifying punishment was public whipping. Stripped to the waist, Elsbeth would be tied to a post in the square and whipped a set number of times. Each lash was not just a strike against her skin, but a mark upon her reputation, a permanent stain that she would carry for the rest of her life, assuming she survived. These whippings were intended to cause both intense pain and lasting scars, physical reminders of her transgression. The public nature of the act ensured that everyone witnessed her suffering and her shame. Beyond physical torment, there were rituals designed to permanently mark a woman as an adulteress. Forced shearing was one such practice. A woman's long hair was often seen as a symbol of her femininity and honor. To have it crudely hacked off in public was a profound act of degradation. It stripped her of a key part of her identity and visually branded her as an outcast. For months, even years, her short, uneven hair would announce her sin to every person she met. She became a walking symbol of her own supposed moral failure. In some parts of Germanic Europe, the punishments took on an even more systematic and cruel nature. The Sachsenspiegel, a 13th-century German law code, prescribed that a cheating wife could be killed by her husband with impunity. If he chose to spare her, the law laid out a grim alternative. The woman would be stripped, and her lover would be hanged over her. After his death, his body would be taken down, and she would be forced to drag it to a burial site and inter it with her own hands. This grotesque ritual bound her physically and psychologically to her transgression, a macabre and deeply traumatic form of punishment. It's crucial to understand that these punishments were not applied equally. A husband's infidelity, while frowned upon, was often treated with far more leniency. It might be seen as a minor sin or simply a private matter between him and his wife. He would rarely, if ever, face the public stocks, the whip, or the humiliating parades that were reserved for women. This stark double standard reveals the deeply patriarchal nature of medieval society. Where a woman's body and her fidelity were seen as the property of her husband and, by extension, the community, her crime was not just against her husband. It was seen as a threat to the entire social fabric, a disruption of the lineage and property rights that were central to the medieval world. For Elsbeth and countless real women like her, the punishment didn't end when the crowds dispersed from the village square. The public shaming was just the beginning of a life of ostracism. She would be shunned by former friends, denied entry to shops, and perhaps even cast out by her own family. Her children might be taken from her. In a small, close-knit community, this social isolation could be a fate worse than death. She would be a ghost in her own village, a constant reminder of the brutal consequences of defying the rigid moral codes of her time. These practices, while horrifying to us today, were an integral part of the medieval legal and social landscape. They were tools used to maintain order, enforce religious doctrine, and uphold a patriarchal system that placed immense pressure on female fidelity. They reveal a world where justice was public, punishment was physical, and shame was a weapon. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of a difficult chapter in history. It's a sobering reminder of how societies have enforced their values and the long journey towards more equitable standards of justice. If you found this video informative, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the past. We'll see you in the next video. Imagine this: the heart of a small, tightly knit village, a place where everyone knows everyone else's business. In the center of the square, a spectacle is unfolding, one that would be seared into the collective memory of the community for generations. The air is thick with a strange mix of emotions. It's not just a sentence being carried out. It's a public performance, a stark lesson for all to see. The villagers are gathered, drawn by a morbid curiosity they can't quite shake. They stand in hushed clusters, their faces a canvas of conflicting feelings. You see horror in the wide eyes of the young, fascination in the hardened gazes of the old. It's a chilling tableau. On one side, you hear the whispers, sharp and cutting like the winter wind. "She had it coming," one mutters, pulling their shawl tighter. "Played with fire and got burned." These are the voices of judgment, these self-appointed guardians of morality. Their words reinforcing the rigid lines of acceptable behavior. For them, this isn't just punishment. It's a validation of their own righteousness. A grim "I told you so" played out for the whole village to witness. But then, you listen closer and hear another sound, a softer counter-melody of pity. Poor soul. A woman sighs, her hand instinctively going to her heart. Was it really so bad, what she did, to deserve this? These are the whispers of empathy, of a shared humanity that even fear can't completely extinguish. They see not just a sinner, but a neighbor, a daughter, a friend. They feel a pang of compassion, a flicker of doubt about the justice being served. This division of opinion highlights the complex social fabric of the village, a community wrestling with its own conscience. This public shaming was a powerful tool. It was a mechanism of control, a way for the community to police itself without the need for formal laws or officers. Fear was the real enforcer. The fear of being the next one in the square. The fear of having your own secrets, your own private life, laid bare for all to judge. By turning a private matter into a public spectacle, the community drew a bold line in the sand. This is what we accept, and this is what we condemn. Your life wasn't entirely your own. It belonged, in part, to the collective judgment of your neighbors. The act itself was almost secondary to the reaction it provoked. The real drama was playing out in the crowd. The way people looked at each other, the silent agreements, the averted glances. It was a powerful reminder that in a small community, your reputation was everything. It was your currency, your shield, and your greatest vulnerability. Lose it, and you lose your place in the world. The sentence wasn't just about the physical act. It was about social annihilation, about being cast out from the circle of belonging. Think about the psychology at play. The spectacle served a dual purpose. For the compliant, it was a confirmation of their own good standing. Look, their silence seemed to say, "I follow the rules. I am safe." For the wavering, it was a terrifying warning. Step out of line, and this could be you. It created an atmosphere where conformity wasn't just encouraged, it was essential for survival. Individuality, especially if it challenged the established norms, was a dangerous liability. And what about the person at the center of it all? Stripped of dignity, their identity reduced to their transgression. They became a symbol, a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones for years to come. Their story wasn't their own anymore. It was co-opted by the community, twisted and retold to serve a purpose, to maintain order, to reinforce the status quo, and to ensure that the delicate balance of the village, built on a foundation of shared values and mutual surveillance, was never truly threatened. This event reveals so much about how fear operates within a closed society. It wasn't just the fear of authority. It was the fear of your own neighbors. The people you shared bread with, the people you celebrated holidays with, could also be your judges and jury. This constant, low-level anxiety shaped every interaction, every decision. It fostered a culture of silence around personal struggles and forced a performance of piety and conformity. The spectacle was also a form of entertainment, a dark and twisted one. In a world with few distractions, a public punishment was a major event. It broke the monotony of daily life, providing a jolt of drama and excitement. People were both repulsed and captivated. This fascination with the downfall of others is a deeply human, if unsettling, trait. It allows people to feel a sense of moral superiority while simultaneously indulging a voyeuristic curiosity. They watch, horrified, but they do watch. As the day wore on and the crowd began to disperse, the atmosphere in the village would have changed. The initial shock and excitement would curdle into a lingering unease. The whispers would continue, but now behind closed doors. The event would become a part of the village's folklore, a story told to frighten children and warn teenagers. The square, once a place of commerce and community, would forever be marked by what happened there. This story isn't just a relic of the past, it's a powerful examination of the dynamics of social control that still exist today, albeit in different forms. Think about the modern-day public shaming that happens online. How a private mistake can become a global spectacle. How communities form to pass judgment. And how fear of being canceled or called out shapes our public behavior. The tools have changed, from the village square to the social media feed. But the underlying human instincts, the need to belong, the fear of exclusion, and the morbid fascination with the downfall of others remain startlingly the same. The tale of this village forces us to look in the mirror and ask uncomfortable questions. How do we participate in moral policing in our own lives? When does upholding community standards cross the line into cruel and dehumanizing punishment? And in our interconnected world, have we just built a bigger village square with a much larger and often more merciless crowd? The echoes of that day, of the whispers of judgment and pity, can still be heard if we listen closely enough. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into a complex and thought-provoking story. If you found this analysis interesting, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next video. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Till next time. The judgment fell not only on Elsbeth, but cast a long, dark shadow over her entire family. The public shaming was a spectacle, and in its wake, her children became the easiest targets for the town's cruelty. Imagine her eldest son, barely a man, trying to hold his head high as whispers and jeers followed him through the market square. "There goes the witch's boy," they'd hiss, their words like stones. Her younger daughter, once bright and full of laughter, now clung to the safety of their home, her friendships dissolving like morning mist. The games she used to play were now twisted into cruel reenactments of her mother's punishment. Every pointed finger, every taunt, was a fresh wound not just for the children, but for Elsbeth, who had to watch their innocence curdle into fear and shame. This was the insidious nature of medieval justice. It wasn't just about punishing the accused. It was about making an example, and the family was collateral damage, a living testament to the consequences of straying from the norm. The children, who had done nothing wrong, were suddenly pariahs. They were ostracized from the very community that was supposed to nurture them. Teachers at the small parish school would look past them. Other parents would pull their own children away, and the invitations to festivals and gatherings simply stopped coming. Their social world, once vibrant and welcoming, had shrunk to the four walls of their home. Each day was a battle against social isolation, a constant reminder that their mother's alleged crime had now become their own inherited stain. A brand upon their name that would be incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to wash away. And then there was Elsbeth's husband, a man caught in an impossible bind. Let's call him Conrad. He loved his wife, of that there was no doubt. He had stood by her through the accusations, defending her name, believing in her innocence. But love, he was discovering, was a fragile shield against the immense weight of social pressure. Conrad was a craftsman, perhaps a blacksmith or a cooper, his livelihood dependent on the goodwill of his neighbors. Now his workshop, once a hub of activity and friendly chatter, grew quiet. Old customers would hesitate at his door, their eyes filled with a mixture of pity and suspicion, before turning away to take their business elsewhere. The contracts he relied on began to dry up. His friends, men he had shared ale and stories with for years, now avoided his gaze in the tavern. He was being forced to choose between the woman he loved and the very survival of his family. The pressure from his own kin was relentless. His brothers and cousins would visit, not with words of comfort, but with stern warnings. "You must think of the family name," they'd say. "Think of your children's future. How can they find a good match? How can your son secure an apprenticeship? You must distance yourself from her for the good of everyone." Every day, Conrad wrestled with this agonizing dilemma. He would look at Elsbeth, seeing the woman he married, the mother of his children, her spirit slowly being crushed. Then he would look at his children, their faces etched with the misery of being outcasts, and a cold dread would grip his heart. This was the ripple effect of the sentence. It wasn't a single stone thrown into a pond. 'Twas a boulder, and the waves it created threatened to drown them all. The strain began to show in their home, the one place that should have been a sanctuary. The silence between Elsbeth and Conrad grew heavier. How could he comfort her when he himself was drowning in despair? How could she lean on him when she saw the doubt and fear warring in his eyes? The conversations they once had, filled with plans for the future and shared dreams, were replaced by whispered arguments born of desperation. "Maybe it would be better if I left," she might have said one night. Her voice barely audible, believing her absence could heal the wounds she had inadvertently caused. And he, torn and exhausted, might not have had the strength to immediately refute it. This was the true, deep-seated cruelty of the system. It didn't just break a person. It sought to sever the most fundamental human bonds, the love between a husband and wife, the security of a family. The social standing they had carefully built over years was crumbling to dust. In a world where reputation was everything, where your name and your family's honor were your most valuable assets, they were now bankrupt. A family that was once respected, invited to weddings and christenings. Part of the town's fabric was now pushed to the absolute margins. They became ghosts in their own community, seen but not acknowledged. The punishment had effectively redrawn their social map, placing them in a barren, isolated wasteland. The family was a unit, and an attack on one member was an attack on the whole. The authorities knew this. They relied on this. It was a powerful tool of control, ensuring that the fear of social and economic ruin would keep others in line. So, as Elsbeth endured her physical punishment, her family endured a psychological one, just as public and perhaps even more prolonged. Her husband faced the slow, agonizing death of his business and his social life. Her children faced a childhood stolen by mockery and isolation. This was the unspoken clause in her sentence, that her family would serve it with her. It demonstrates a key aspect of medieval justice, where the concept of individual guilt was often blurred. The family was seen as an extension of the individual, and the sins of one could taint them all. The judgment wasn't just about Elsbeth. It was a warning sent to every family in the town. This is what happens when you step out of line. The punishment will follow you home. It will sit at your dinner table, and it will poison everything you hold dear. It was a devastatingly effective system of social control. And the wreckage it left in the lives of families like Elsbeth's was its most profound and tragic legacy. In the dim light of the tavern that evening, the air, usually thick with boisterous laughter and drunken songs, was heavy and still. The villagers drank in silence, the fire in the hearth casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock their somber mood. Most kept their eyes fixed on their ale, unwilling to meet anyone's gaze, as if ashamed of their collective inaction. The sentence passed on Elsbeth was a stone in the gut of the community, a cold reminder of the iron fist of their traditions. Publicly, everyone had nodded in agreement, their faces masks of stern approval. But in the quiet corners, in the shared glances between mugs of ale, a different story was being written. It began with a whisper, a low murmur that barely cut through the crackle of the fire. Old Man Hemlock, a farmer whose hands were as gnarled as the roots of his oldest oak trees, shook his head slowly. He spoke to no one in particular, his voice a gravelly rumble. To lose her home for a simple mistake. The winter is not kind. It's a death sentence, is what it is. A few heads turned, then quickly turned back. Agreement was dangerous, but the seed of doubt was planted. Across the room, two women, their faces etched with the hardships of village life, were mending a fishing net. "She's always been good to my little ones," one of them, Mara, said softly, her fingers pausing their work. When Tomas had the fever, she was the first to bring a cooling cloth and a warm broth. She asked for nothing in return. Her companion Lisbeth nodded, her lips a thin, tight line. "It's the council," she hissed, her voice low and sharp. "They make an example of her to keep us all in line. They fear anyone who thinks for themselves." The sentiment was a dangerous one, a spark in a tinder dry forest. But the real fire was about to be lit. A young woman named Freya, known more for her quiet demeanor and skill with a loom than for any kind of defiance, stood up. Her chair scraped against the rough-hewn floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense silence. All eyes turned to her. She was Elsbeth's cousin, but they had never been particularly close. Still, a bond of blood and shared humanity pulsed within her. Her heart was a drum against her ribs, but her voice, when she spoke, was clear and steady. "You're all just going to let this happen?" she asked, her gaze sweeping across the room, challenging every averted eye. You saw her face. you saw the terror. She did not act out of malice. She was desperate, and we all know how hard the seasons have been. A man near the bar scoffed. "Hold your tongue, girl. The council has spoken. It's the law." The law? Freya's voice rose, laced with a passion no one had ever heard from her before. What law says we must be cruel? What tradition demands we abandon one of our own to the wolves, both literal and figurative? We've all struggled. We've all known hunger. Is this who we are? A village that preys on its weakest members when they stumble. Her words hung in the air, electric and undeniable. She wasn't just defending Elsbeth. She was holding up a mirror to every person in that room. She was questioning the very foundation of their society, the unwritten rules that demanded conformity at the expense of compassion. The tavern keeper, a burly man named Boren, moved to quiet her down, his face a mixture of fear and sympathy. "Freya, that's enough. You'll bring trouble on yourself." But Freya stood her ground. "No, trouble is already here. It's in our silence. It's in the way we look away while a good woman is condemned. Elsbeth made a mistake. But our silence, our complicity, that is a choice. A sin far greater than hers." She looked directly at Old Man Hemlock, at Mara and Lisbeth, at the faces in the shadows. "I will not be silent. I will go to her. I will bring her food and blankets. And if the council wishes to punish me for an act of kindness, then let them. Let them show everyone just how hollow their justice really is." She turned and walked out of the tavern, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. The door swung shut, and for a long moment, nobody moved. The quiet wasn't just somber anymore. It was charged, filled with a new, dangerous energy. Freya's speech hadn't started a riot. It had done something far more powerful. It had ignited the conscience of a village. In the flickering firelight, a few people exchanged looks. They were no longer just glances of shared sorrow, but of dawning resolve. The seeds of rebellion, watered by empathy and courage, had been sown. The harsh social norms of their world had just been challenged, not by a warrior with a sword, but by a young woman armed with nothing more than her voice and a belief in simple human decency. And in that harsh, unforgiving society, that was the most revolutionary weapon of all. Imagine for a moment surviving something truly awful, only to find that survival itself is a different kind of prison. That's where we find Elsbeth, the woman at the heart of our story. She made it through the brutal public shaming, but her life from that day forward was irrevocably stained. The scarlet letter she was forced to wear wasn't just a piece of cloth. It was a constant, burning reminder to her and everyone she met of her sin. In her village, and in countless others across medieval Europe, life went on. The rigid moral codes, the swift and public punishments, they all continued. But something curious was happening beneath the surface. Let's step back and look at the bigger picture. These punishments, like the Cuckold's Parade or the Shorn Heads, were designed to be the ultimate deterrent. The idea was simple. Make the penalty so horrifying, so humiliating, that no one would dare transgress. It was social control in its most raw and visceral form. But even the people enforcing these laws, the magistrates, the priests, the town elders, were sometimes taken aback by the sheer cruelty of it all. We have records, personal letters, and court documents where you can sense a hesitation, a flicker of doubt. They'd write about the necessary severity of the punishment, but the language they used often betrays a sense of shock at what they themselves were orchestrating. Think about the psychological impact. It wasn't just about physical pain. It was about stripping someone of their identity, their dignity, their very place in the community. You were no longer Elsbeth, the baker's wife, or Ingrid the weaver. You were the adulteress. Your name was erased, replaced by your shame. This process of dehumanization was a powerful tool, but it was also a dangerous one. It created a society living in fear, where a single mistake could lead to social annihilation. The community, which was supposed to be a source of support, became a court of 1,000 judgmental eyes. These practices weren't uniform across Europe, of course. In some parts of Italy, a wronged husband might have the legal right to kill his wife and her lover on the spot. In parts of France, the punishments were more focused on fines and property confiscation, especially for the upper classes. But the theme of public humiliation was a common thread that ran through nearly every culture. Why? Because honor, especially a man's honor, was tied directly to his wife's fidelity. Her actions didn't just reflect on her. They reflected on his ability to control his household, his masculinity, his standing in the community. The public shaming was as much about restoring his honor as it was about punishing her. Now, let's consider Elsbeth's future. What did survival actually mean for her? It meant being an outcast in her own home. Neighbors who once shared bread with her would now cross the street to avoid her. Children would point and whisper. She would be barred from certain parts of the church, and her presence at any public gathering would be a spectacle. Finding work would be nearly impossible. Her family, too, would bear the stain of her shame. Her parents might be shunned, her siblings might find their own marriage prospects ruined. The ripple effects were devastating, touching every aspect of her life and the lives of those she loved. This system of shame was incredibly effective, but it was also incredibly fragile. It relied on a collective agreement to participate in the shaming. What happens when people start to question it? What happens when empathy begins to outweigh judgment? Throughout the later Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, we start to see a subtle shift. Legal codes become more complex. The idea of private sin versus public crime starts to gain traction. Philosophers and theologians began to debate the nature of justice and mercy. They asked, is it truly just to destroy a person's life for a single mistake? Does such extreme public shaming truly lead to repentance? Or does it just breed resentment and despair? The story of Elsbeth isn't just a relic of a dark and distant past. It's a mirror. The echoes of these practices, this obsession with public shaming and the policing of women's morality, have reverberated through the centuries. Think about the Salem witch trials, where gossip and social paranoia led to mass hysteria and death. Think about the treatment of fallen women in the Victorian era, locked away in asylums or forced into workhouses. The tools changed, the stocks and the scarlet letter were replaced by social ostracism and institutionalization, but the underlying impulse remained the same. Even today, in the age of the internet, haven't we just created a new kind of digital pillory? A misplaced tweet, an old photo taken out of context, a private moment made public, it can all lead to a firestorm of online shaming. The crowd that once gathered in the village square now gathers on social media, casting digital stones. The speed and scale are different, but the fundamental human behavior, the desire to enforce social norms through public humiliation, is hauntingly familiar. We are still grappling with the same questions that troubled those medieval magistrates. Where is the line between justice and cruelty? Between holding people accountable and utterly destroying them? The legacy of Elsbeth's shame is a profound and uncomfortable one. It forces us to look at our own societies and ask what scarlet letters we impose today. Who do we cast out? Who do we publicly shame? And why? The medieval world might seem brutal and alien to us, but the human instincts that drove their actions are still very much alive within us. Understanding their world, the world that created and then was shocked by Elsbeth's fate, is essential to understanding our own. It's a reminder that the line between civilization and cruelty can be terrifyingly thin, and that the call for empathy is a timeless and urgent one. The story ends, but the reflection continues. We've journeyed through a harsh and unforgiving landscape of medieval justice. And what we've found is a complex tapestry of law, religion, and human nature. The punishments were extreme, the shame was all-encompassing, but even then, there were whispers of doubt, glimmers of a different way. The world has changed immensely since Elsbeth's time. But the challenge of building a just and compassionate society remains. Her story, a legacy of shame, serves as a powerful cautionary tale, urging us to look closer at the judgments we pass today. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into history. If you found this journey as fascinating as I did, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more stories from our incredible past.